The loud crack of a wooden practice sword echoed across the quiet suburban street just as I stepped outside with my morning coffee. Birds scattered from the maple trees, a bicycle tipped over on a nearby lawn, and every curious neighbor turned toward the source of the commotion. Standing in the middle of the road was a young man with a black belt tied tightly around his waist, his fists clenched and his pride burning brighter than the summer sun. His eyes locked onto mine with the confidence that only youth and constant praise could create. He believed strength was measured by how loudly someone could challenge another person. He had no idea the gray-haired man he was staring at had once led a Navy SEAL team through missions where a single mistake meant that good men never came home. Some battles leave no medals that can erase their memories, and some warriors spend the rest of their lives praying they never have to fight again. Some people spend their lives trying to prove they are strong. Others spend the rest of their lives hoping they never have to prove it again. If stories about humility, forgiveness, and second chances mean something to you, thank you for spending your time here. My name is Mason Carter, and after 24 years in the Navy, I wanted nothing more than silence. I bought a modest little house on the edge of a peaceful neighborhood, planted vegetables in my backyard, restored old furniture in my garage, and volunteered at the local community center. Most people assumed I had been an ordinary retired serviceman. That assumption suited me perfectly. The less anyone knew about my past, the easier it was to live with it. Across the street lived Victor Ashford, a wealthy businessman whose mansion looked more like a luxury hotel than a family home. Imported cars filled his driveway, landscapers visited twice a week, and expensive deliveries arrived almost daily. Victor loved success, but he loved displaying it even more. Every conversation somehow circled back to money, influence, or achievements. His greatest pride, however, was his only son, Adrian, an 18-year-old martial arts champion who had earned a black belt at an unusually young age and won several regional tournaments. Adrian was talented beyond question. He trained harder than most adults, possessed remarkable speed, and had enough discipline inside the dojo to impress every instructor who watched him. Unfortunately, success without humility had slowly become arrogance. His father celebrated every victory but rarely corrected every act of disrespect. Over time Adrian began believing that anyone older, slower, or quieter simply wasn't worth listening to. I noticed the pattern long before anyone else admitted it. Delivery drivers were mocked for moving too slowly. Elderly joggers were laughed at for struggling up hills. Kids who wanted to learn martial arts became targets of harmless-looking demonstrations that always ended with someone embarrassed. The neighborhood shrugged because Adrian never seriously hurt anyone. They called it confidence. I called it a warning. One Saturday afternoon, I was repairing a broken fence for Mrs. Holloway, an 80-year-old widow whose husband had served during Vietnam. Adrian wandered over while recording videos for social media. He laughed at my old work gloves, mocked my slow movements, and proudly announced that people my age should stop pretending they could still work hard. I simply smiled and continued hammering nails into the fence. Mrs. Holloway thanked me with homemade lemonade, and that simple act confused Adrian more than any argument ever could. He expected anger. Instead, he watched kindness answer disrespect. For a brief moment I thought he might actually reflect on what he had witnessed. Instead, he walked away shaking his head. The following week the neighborhood hosted a charity festival supporting injured veterans and local first responders. Families gathered beneath colorful tents while children played games and musicians performed on a small outdoor stage. I volunteered at the grill, flipping hamburgers beside retired firefighters and police officers. It was exactly the kind of peaceful day I had hoped retirement would bring. Near the basketball court, Adrian organized an informal martial arts demonstration. His athletic ability amazed everyone. Fast kicks, spinning strikes, and flawless combinations earned loud applause. Cameras surrounded him. Every successful move fueled his confidence a little more. Then someone jokingly pointed toward me and said the retired Navy guy might be able to handle him. The crowd laughed. Adrian didn't. He walked directly toward me. Without raising his voice, he announced that people kept talking about military toughness and wondered whether it was actually real. He suggested a friendly sparring match so everyone could see whether experience meant anything against modern training. The festival suddenly became silent. Children stopped running. Parents looked uncomfortable. Victor smiled proudly from the front row, believing another public victory awaited his son. I quietly placed my spatula on the table and looked into Adrian's determined eyes. They weren't filled with hatred. They were filled with something far more dangerous, certainty that he could never lose. I politely declined. Some people interpreted my refusal as fear. Adrian certainly did. He laughed loudly enough for everyone to hear and claimed that reputation disappears when courage is tested. His words stung less than the memories they awakened. I remembered teammates whose courage had never been questioned because they never returned home. I remembered carrying wounded friends through smoke. I remembered writing letters to families who deserved impossible answers. Real courage had never looked anything like public applause. The crowd slowly dispersed, disappointed that no fight had happened, but Adrian wasn't finished. Over the next several days he continued making comments whenever our paths crossed. He challenged me during morning walks, while I watered my garden, and even while I helped coach children at the community center. Every single time, I refused. One afternoon Coach Samuel Briggs, an elderly martial arts instructor who had taught for more than 40 years, visited the neighborhood center. After watching Adrian boast to younger students, Coach Briggs gently reminded him that every true black belt learns that fighting is always the last choice, never the first. Adrian dismissed the advice. The old instructor quietly walked away with sadness in his eyes. A week later, everything changed. Heavy rain swept through town, flooding roads and knocking down power lines. Emergency crews struggled to respond as fast-moving water trapped several vehicles beneath a damaged bridge outside the neighborhood. Without thinking, years of training took over. While everyone panicked, I assessed the current, located safe access points, coordinated volunteers, and entered the rushing water with rescue equipment stored in my truck from community emergency drills. People didn't see an old retiree anymore. They saw calm. They saw leadership. They saw experience earned through countless moments where panic only made tragedy worse. Working alongside firefighters, we rescued a frightened mother and her little daughter from a partially submerged vehicle moments before the current swept it away. As paramedics treated the survivors, Adrian stood frozen on the roadside. For the first time since meeting me, he wasn't looking at me with arrogance. He was looking with confusion. That evening local news stations interviewed emergency responders. One firefighter mentioned that retired Navy officer Mason Carter had organized civilians so effectively that valuable minutes had been saved. The reporter asked about my military background. I answered briefly. Years ago, I had led a Navy SEAL team overseas. That was all. No stories. No details. No dramatic speeches. The silence after those words carried far more weight than anything else I could have said. News spread through the neighborhood overnight. Victor appeared uncomfortable whenever we crossed paths. Neighbors suddenly understood why I never bragged, never argued, and never accepted challenges. Because the strongest people rarely need strangers to recognize their strength. The next afternoon Adrian knocked quietly on my front door. His confident posture had disappeared. His shoulders seemed heavier. His eyes avoided mine. He admitted he had mistaken silence for weakness. Winning tournaments had convinced him he understood courage, yet one rescue operation had taught him more than years of collecting medals. Instead of criticizing him, I invited him into my workshop. Together we repaired an old rocking chair that belonged to Mrs. Holloway. For hours we worked side by side without discussing martial arts. We sanded rough edges. Replaced broken joints. Applied fresh varnish. Sometimes people learn best when hands stay busy and pride stays quiet. Eventually Adrian asked the question he had carried since the rescue. He wanted to know why I never accepted his challenge. I looked at the photographs hanging above my workbench. They showed smiling young men wearing uniforms. Some never reached 30. I explained that every fight leaves something behind, even when you win. Bruises heal faster than memories. The greatest lesson military service gave me wasn't how to defeat another person. It was understanding the value of avoiding battles whenever possible. His eyes filled with emotion. For the first time, he truly understood. Over the following months Adrian changed in ways no championship could ever accomplish. He volunteered at the community center, helped elderly neighbors with yard work, and began assisting Coach Briggs in teaching younger martial arts students. Instead of demonstrating how powerful he was, he focused on helping frightened children believe in themselves. Victor changed too. Watching his son mature forced him to reconsider the values he had rewarded for years. Wealth suddenly seemed much less important than character. The neighborhood noticed the difference. Arguments became conversations. Competition became cooperation. Respect replaced fear. One autumn afternoon the annual charity festival returned. This time Adrian performed another martial arts demonstration. But it ended differently. Instead of inviting someone to fight, he bowed toward Coach Briggs, thanked every instructor who had shaped his life, and publicly acknowledged that true strength begins the moment pride ends. The loudest applause of the day wasn't for a spectacular kick. It was for a young man who finally understood humility. As I watched from the crowd, I realized my greatest victory had never happened on a battlefield. It had happened in a quiet neighborhood where one angry teenager discovered that kindness could accomplish what fists never could. If this story touched your heart, thank you for being here and for sharing in its message of humility, compassion, and second chances.